Following a trail of unsolved serial murders across the country, Rachel and I have uncovered a disturbing reality. A broken system of policing that allows hundreds of active serial killers to go unchecked, and an untold number of victims to go unnoticed.
There are thousands and thousands of cold cases, unsolved homicides, thousands of missing persons, and thousands of unidentified bodies every year. And when you add these together, eventually it becomes a number that becomes insurmountable.
With 22,000 different law enforcement agencies failing to communicate and none required to share their crime data, journalist Tom Hargrove has taken it upon himself to compile the most comprehensive murder database in the country.
The reality is we're messing this up. Too many killings go unsolved, and there is nobody who's really trying to connect the dots.
And now Tom has shared with us an algorithm that can detect unknown serial killers. But before we delve into the data, there's one last case that demands our attention. One with eerie parallels to Gilgo Beach that has some suggesting a possible connection.
The lead investigators in the West Mesa buried bodies case are keeping a close eye on Long Island.
As we shed light on a real-life nightmare in Albuquerque, New Mexico, one that's given rise to a boogeyman who may still roam the city streets, and a desert burial ground known as the West Mesa. Police would uncover the skeletal remains of 11 nude women buried on the West Mesa, a desert plateau overlooking the city that had recently been opened for housing development. Most of the missing have been young Hispanic women who resorted to sex work to feed their addictions. The first to disappear in May of 2003 was 22-year-old Monica Candelaria. Monica's family is still troubled by a mysterious call, claiming her body had been dumped out on the mesa years before she was found there. Then there was the youngest victim, Jamie Barella, only 15 when she vanished with her cousin, 22-year-old Evelyn Salazar. It's assumed Jamie wasn't a sex worker, but she was following in the footsteps of her older cousin, who's involved in the local drug trade. Most of the other victims were last seen on Central Avenue, which runs through an area infested with drugs and violence known as the War Zone. Finally, there was Michelle Valdez, the last victim to disappear, just 4 months pregnant when her body was unearthed. So here we are again, making another difficult journey to meet loved ones who've been left with no answers and no justice. And it's a feeling that's becoming all too familiar.
I was Doreen's best friend growing up. I just think, like, what could have happened? Where would she be today, you know? Today I'm married and I have children, and I just think, would she be here too? Sorry. I just feel like maybe she could have turned her life around. You know, she never got that opportunity. She never got that chance. What are they doing? Like, what is being done today to know that this is still not going on, that there's still not someone out there murdering girls?
My daughter was a sister. She was a mother, and she was a good person. When Michelle first went missing, the police said, well, until we have a body, there's really not a whole lot. I said, well, hell, there's not one gonna fall out of the damn sky in your lap. You need to get out here and talk to people. I have yet today get an answer for any of the specific questions that I have asked Albuquerque Police Department.
There's been a huge amount of finger pointing at the police. And once it started to become clear who the women were who'd been killed and buried out there, the obvious question for everybody to ask was, how the f did you not know there was a serial killer operating in the city right under your noses?
Rachel and I reached out to the Albuquerque police to hear their side of the story and to get an update on the case, but we're told no interviews would be given, which has now led us to try a less official route.
The task force is called the 118th Street Task Force, and they're saying if you have any information, you may call Detective Mark Mannery. Have you tried calling this number?
I don't think so. Are you kidding me?
Dialed is not a working number. Please check the number and dial again.
Let me try the other one.
That's ridiculous.
Albuquerque Police, how can I help you?
Yeah, how you doing? Can I get the number for the 118th Street Task Force?
The 118th Street?
Yeah, the task force to find all the women who were killed out on the Mesa.
Okay.
I'm looking at at the website. Is that number familiar to you at all?
It's not, but if they gave that number, I would try it.
Both those numbers don't seem to be working.
I don't know then.
How hard are they making it for people to give tips?
Much like in Long Island and Atlantic City, the Albuquerque Police Department's refusal to talk was all too familiar. But the deeper we dug, the more we began to wonder if their silence wasn't rooted in something far more sinister.
So 11 victims, all found on the Mesa, almost all of them working on Central. But let's look at what connected them outside of that.
Okay.
So the first, most obvious, is Jamie and Evelyn, right? Because they're cousins. Veronica Romero and Zeman Elks knew each other through Romero's cousin, Desiree Gonzalez. Julia Nieto and Victoria Chavez, we heard, were friends.
While we've learned these women all knew each other in some form or another, there was something else. We've uncovered numerous instances where family members received calls that their loved ones had been killed and dumped out on the Mesa months or even years before their bodies were ever found there.
My youngest daughter got a call from a little girl that used to be our neighbors and said, "I'm sorry to hear about Michelle, that her and a girl named Cinnamon had been stabbed a bunch of times and thrown out on the West Mesa."
You received a lot of phone calls?
Yeah. I don't know who it was, some man. And he said if I gave him $5,000, he'll tell me where they're buried.
It was a call,
yeah,
an anonymous call.
Because they had heard Monica was thrown in the Mesa.
And then there was the call Cinnamon Elks' mom received from a woman who'd heard that Cinnamon and victim Michelle Valdez had both been killed and dumped out on the Mesa. In an eerie twist, the caller was Virginia Cloven, who was later found buried with Cinnamon and Michelle in that same mass grave.
So is this some random serial killer who's picking people off? Or is this something more?
It seems like there's definitely something more here.
So the idea is maybe it's not a random serial killer. How would all these people know beforehand?
Yeah, I've often wondered that.
But if it wasn't a serial killer, then who was it?
In 2004, Michelle's father, Dan, told me that Michelle was in jail in Arizona. So Dan and I made a trip to Kingman, Arizona, and got Michelle out of jail. All the way home from Arizona, all she kept saying was, "Oh my God, at least they didn't find what was in the gas tank."
The gas tank?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that was?
Drugs. I think they were running drugs in a stolen vehicle to Las Vegas, Nevada.
Do you get the feeling maybe that there were numerous girls found on the Mesa who are also running drugs?
Oh yeah, I believe that.
I believe that drug activity is at the heart of why these girls were targeted.
Diana Valdez is an investigative reporter who's written about the disappearances and murders of hundreds of women in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, just hours south of Albuquerque, across the Mexican border.
The Mexican drug cartels in particular are the ones that operate in the Juarez-El Paso border and that also operate in Albuquerque tend to use women to carry the drugs, collect money, and to send terrifying messages to the community.
So how do they send messages through women?
They kill them, they mutilate and kill them to reinforce their status. We're here, we're doing business, and nobody better mess with us because this is what can happen to your women. What was startling to me about that is we know that women had their breasts cut off, and then we see in the first femicides in Juarez had that trademark, had that signature.
Jamie Barella's mother would confirm that her 15-year-old daughter had in fact been mutilated.
They took me in the room, told me one of her breasts were cut off, and 3 of her fingers and 3 of her toes.
So it's a very strong likelihood that we're dealing with narcoterrorism. If the conditions that existed back then continue now, then you're going to have more graveyards like this.
Do you believe there's a second burial site?
There's probably more than a second burial site. There are probably several. By the mountains, by the river. It's just so vast. It's very easy to hide a body.
There are thousands of missing persons in our country.
We don't have law enforcement agencies working together.
There is nobody trying to connect the dots.
I am aware of other serial killers that I do know personally.
Are any of these guys still out there?
Yes, ma'am.